I would tell 20-year-old Steven, do what you feel like you want to do. Because I've always just pursued things I'm excited about and make me passionate.
Mm.
And then I just figure out later, whether this is a good idea or not. And I just find that that's the best way to live life. Don't be constrained by what other people think. Do what you are passionate about and excites you. We're only on this earth for a short time.
Yeah.
Make yourself happy. That's very important.
So, welcome to It's Never About Money community again, season 4. We're going great guns, and I'm really excited to have Stephen Scheeler on our podcast. It's super exciting. I've listened to him at a conference just recently. I was super curious. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, so I thought, why not invite him to our podcast to really, I think, thematically, we're talking about personal development today. So, welcome, Stephen, firstly.
Thank you, Joe. Good to be here.
So I might just introduce you a little bit more formally before we get into things. So you're the former Facebook CEO for Australia and New Zealand, where you guided Facebook's rise from a quirky startup to media and technology titan. You've worked with Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook's Silicon Valley leaders, and your tenure at Facebook saw the ANZ business, including Instagram, Messenger, WhatsApp, and Oculus, become one of the most successful Facebook markets in the world. And now you're the founder of the Digital CEO, senior advisor to McKinsey & Company, and executive in residence at the Australian Graduate School of Management, and also co-founder and CEO, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the episode, of Omniscient. I hope I got that right. Also,
Yes.
I hope I got your surname right, by the way. Omniscient, good. AI, the world leader in using AI to decode the human brain.
There you go.
So, Stephen, a little bit of a long-winded one, but sometimes as humans we establish these certain patterns, and it seems to me that we establish these patterns against sometimes our biological or human inclinations, and we actually know it. So the patterns can be manifest themselves in poor physical health or mental health outcomes. We can have work addictions, and it seems to me that there are two aspects of pattern change or disrupting these patterns that are challenging. The first is having the awareness that the pattern actually exists at all. And then the second is dealing with the costs associated with changing that pattern. So that it might be, as an example, the fear of failure. So, Stephen, you're a man that has made a history of making change, a man that has seen a path and changed patterns to get there. Can we start by chatting about your early history and the types of changes that you've made and how they've been important?
Yeah, it's a great theme, actually. It's very meaningful to me because I was just actually talking to my wife about this the other day, about how I think about solving problems or optionality and how she thinks about it. And we have different approaches. I'm not right, she's not right. We do it just different. But my approach is often I find disruptive for some other folks, which is I don't seem to have a problem with thinking about two conflicting things in my mind at the same time. I frustrate others sometimes because I'm all about optionality. I'm all about, let's think about different possible paths we can go forward here. And so where does that come from? I don't know. I think there's something in my past, perhaps if you dig into my psyche as well. I grew up in the States. I was a small town in middle America. And my parents were great parents, but they weren't particularly intellectually curious people.
Mm-hmm.
They were just, hardworking, kind of working class folks, good parents, but I was more intellectually curious. And I found school frustrating, even in high school, just because I didn't feel challenged enough intellectually. And when I was about probably 15 years old, my mother did something that was really beneficial for me. She took me to a career counselor, and this was 40 years ago. And that career counselor was probably just a grad student from the local university. I don't remember her name. She seemed even then she seemed young to me. She was probably in her early 20s, but she had me do one of those aptitude tests about trying to understand what you're good at and what careers you might be good at. And she came to the conclusion I was really into music, classical music. I loved history, so it came out that I should become a music historian. That was the conclusion.
Just fuse them together.
Exactly. And look, I said, oh, okay. I didn't even know that was a profession. I was in high school, so I did a little investigating. I actually went down to there's a university in the city nearby, and I went and met with the dean of the music school, and I talked to some historians and stuff. And I pretty much figured out, look, that sounds interesting, but I don't think it's a real going to be a real career for me. It's pretty narrow. Um, but it got me thinking more, outside my box, I've got to say, which was good. And then there's a second thing she did that really put me on a great path in life. I was pretty introverted. I was frustrated. I had a couple of siblings who had passed away when I was a kid, and
Yeah.
there was no mental health counseling or services. Our family just never spoke about it. Right? We never
Yeah,
talked
right.
about the people who weren't there,
Mm,
and that haunted my mother her whole life, particularly.
mm.
Um, and so I was the youngest, and these were older brothers and sisters. And so, I think I was like traumatized by that in many ways. But what it did do is it kind of pushed me. It did when it pushed me into a shell. I became very introverted. I became a hypochondriac kid. I didn't want to go to school. I think there's a lot of trauma going on with me. But on the other hand, it also made particularly when I went to this counselor, I started to realize I need to do something about this. Like I need to take charge of my life. And
But
she
it's
came
it's
up.
it's it's this point that I make that you could forgive yourself for actually getting stuck in a certain pattern and not moving out of it. So this really
Mm,
early day, you've gone, I need to do something about this, and
yeah,
it's and what is how does that happen? Like
well, I remember the fear of that moment in a way,
yeah,
um, because opportunities started to present themselves. So there were two opportunities. So one actually happened a little before that. I got the chance to go traveling for the summer with he'd been a friend of a guy had been my friend of my older brother. My brother had passed away, and my brother's about 10 years older than me. And so this was one of his best friends, and he turned up in our life, and I was about 11 maybe years
hmm
old. He was
hmm
like 21.
yep.
um, and he just said, hey, I'll take Stephen on this trip like across America. I'm going, he was going to go drive his car across. And my parents said, do you want to go? And he said it to both me and my brother. My brother's a little older, and my brother said no, I don't want to go. He wanted to stay home. I think he was traumatized too by a lot of things. And I said yes. And I always were very pleased that I said yes to that, because then I got to go off and see the world for the first time. I got out of my small town with this guy. And a couple of years after that, I went hitchhiking. I learned how to hitchhike.
Yeah.
He and I actually did some hitchhiking together. And when I was 13, 14, I said to my parents, I want to hitchhike to California. We lived in New York. And my mother said yes. And I, alone. So I actually went and I hitched
Was that a
from here.
surprise to you that your mother said yes?
In a way, yes. My mother was very, she would support anything I wanted to do. She was
Amazing,
very, she put her
amazing.
kids first. And even it was crazy. But I was a pretty mature 13-year-old, and so literally I hit the road. I hitchhiked all the way to California. This was in the 1970s when the serial killers were all on the loose. I mean, I don't. It's amazing I survived. So I had that moment, but then I got back, and I got into high school. I got to high school, and I got really tired. I was tired all the time. I went to see the family doctor, and he did all these tests, and finally he said, you're just depressed,
Mm.
because I was back into this small town thing. That's when my mother took me to this career counselor. And the final thing that career counselor told me, which was really powerful, she said, you should get out of high school early. In the US, you can accelerate and get out and leave high school early if you want. It's possible. And I never thought of that. And then she further said, you should go overseas. I always wanted to go overseas. She said, you should become an exchange student. And I never thought about being an exchange student. And so out of that, I had to change high schools. I finished high school a year early. So I didn't drop out. I got my degree, graduated, and then I got an exchange. I found an exchange program, only one in my area in my county. I wanted to go to Europe, but there wasn't one to Europe. There was only one that I found. It was to Japan. So I applied for that, and then off I went to Japan. I had no interest in Japan, but I just said I want to go. And my parents weren't rich; they couldn't pay me to go traveling. Um, but those moments where I said I need to break out, I need to do something more, and I was really proud of myself in retrospect that I leaned into it and I said
Mm,
yes.
mm. It,
And
it
I was scared. I was always it's in those moments it was scary, but I did it.
it just reminds me of, I mean, one of the episodes I've done recently, which will be uploaded on for season 4 as well, was talking about early days, and sometimes in situations where strong leadership exists, parental or even within sort of religious dogmatic frameworks as well, the decision making for young people is taken out of their hands. It sounds like to me there was a lot of autonomy in decision making that was made by you early days that strengthened that muscle, that decision making muscle, and probably helped you become a better decision maker with time. Would that be a fair comment?
Yeah. That's a good I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think that's probably true. I feel like I'm fairly decisive.
Yes.
That doesn't mean I'm always right, but I feel I make a decision. I'm comfortable that I've made the decision. I move forward. Right?
That's right for you, right? That's right for
Yeah,
you. Yeah.
and I think that part of that may come from that autonomy. My father was a great dad, but he wasn't heavily involved in the kids' upbringing. He was the classic, fun dad, working all the time. But my mother was the one who raised us. She was really involved, and she was a strong personality.
Mm,
But I
mm,
think one thing she got right, very right, was this ability to give me freedom and to do whatever we wanted to do. If I wanted to take tennis lessons, she'd sign me up and drive me there. If I wanted
mm.
to take anything, painting, I did. I did piano, I did violin, I was on the football team, I did everything I did. And of course, your parents, you don't realize at the time, but your parents are the ones that are supporting all this.
Yes.
And so I was very. She was always there to anything I wanted to do. She would take me to do, and also she had her own ideas. Hey, do you want to learn how to ski? I'll be, oh yeah, I'll learn how to ski because I hadn't thought about that. So she's like, I'll sign you up and we'll go to the lessons. And so yeah, it's a really nice enablement I think that she gave me that probably has held me in good stead ever since.
And it's hard to do this because obviously with time limitations, but we fast forward if we can even do that, because there's a lot of life that was lived, I'm sure, between what we've just finished at
Mm.
and your
Oh yeah.
introduction into Facebook. But obviously there's a lot of yeses going on and nos, and making your way through um, to working within Facebook. And maybe you can talk to me about, at that particular point in time, you'd lived a lot of life and had a lot of experience, and you came in, as you suggest, as being old man Scheeler within the Facebook
Mm.
cauldron. And maybe you can talk a little bit about maybe quickly how you got there, and then also, what it felt like to be that guy who was more mature from a biological standpoint.
um, um, I got to Facebook kind of through happenstance. I was running another startup in those days. So this was a company I had not founded. It was founded by somebody else, but I knew the founders very well, and they needed somebody to come in and get the business up to another level. So that's what I was doing, and I ran into a friend on the street who had worked at Google, and
Mm,
this was in Sydney actually. And Google has always had for a long time has had a pretty big office in Sydney. Facebook had no office back in those days.
yeah.
And he said, "Oh, I've just." I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I've just quit my job. I've gone to work at Facebook." And I said, "Oh, great, interesting." And he said, "You should talk to them too. They're recruiting a lot of people right now. They're trying to build their presence in this region, and you'd be great." And I'm like, "No, what would I do for Facebook? I'd really never even crossed my mind. I wasn't a big social media user. It wasn't kind of part of my where my world was in those days in terms of business or technology. And although obviously knew what it was. Anyway, but I said, sure. And so he said, great, I'll here, can you hook up with this recruiter. And so I talked to her, and that thus started like a 6-month process where we kind of did a dance. And I went through many interviews with Facebook. I was pretty happy with the job I was doing at the
Mm,
time, but I went through 16 interviews, I think it was, at the end of the day, and part of that was driven by the fact that they were doubtful about me because I was not just because I was old, but also like they were concerned because I had an MBA. I'd been a management consultant in the past. These were things that Facebook hated in those days. They were, allergic to anybody over 30 that had some sort of education.
Anti-establishment.
That's right. I was suspicious of anybody who had actually graduated from university. But anyway, I got through all those 16 interviews and eventually got hired, and had a pretty good career there. And so that was that. And then the thing that I didn't realize this age thing was an issue. To be honest with you, it wasn't. That wasn't told to me during the interview process. You can't even necessarily say that, right? It wasn't explicit. I learned it later. But I realized after I joined, I started to look around, and then you quickly realize I'm the oldest guy here, and then you realize I might be the oldest person in this whole company. And sure enough, eventually I found out that I was, and that led to challenges that were beyond just the normal challenges you face joining a company like Facebook. Because I think there was a lot of skepticism about me that came from
challenges of perception of you, or challenges that you came with, given your age, and perhaps sort of fixed.
Well, I think
the
perception ones.
Yep.
I think I was fine. Like I'm like I got this, but I think there was a lot of perceptions. And because the average age was 23 when I joined, I was about 46.
Yep.
And Mark was 26.
Yep.
About 20 years between us. So imagine you're double, whatever age you are.
Yeah.
You're double the average age of the company. And that includes not just the junior burgers, but including your boss and your boss's boss are all in their 20s after your age.
Yep.
And so they have a different take on the world and how you build things and what you do and what success looks like and what matters. And I was quickly challenged by that. I'd never been in that situation before. No, almost none of us ever have. And I had to figure it out very fast. Like, how am I going to gain credibility and be able to have influence in this organization where I am? I need other people to work with me and to pull on the same oars with me to be successful. And so I had to really start to think that through. Like, how do I show? So what do I do? Do I just click into, I'm the smartest guy in the room mode? I've been here before, kids. Listen to me. I thought, no, that's not going to work. Do I go a humble route where I kind of try to be like the kids and, I get my skateboard out or whatever, that's probably not going to, it's not authentic. But I decided on a path that was very just honest and was humble in the sense that I was going to just say a number of things to my team and the people I was working with. Forget about, it's irrelevant what I've done before. It's what I do from here on that matters. Number two, I don't really know anything about what's going on in this company, and I really don't even know how to do my job. And the truth is, I kind of did, but I was very kind of laid myself bare and said, I need you to help me. And so I tried to go around to people and say, I need your help. And I find with people, no matter how old they are, people, it's hard for them to when somebody walks up and say, I need your help. And I was very specific about what I needed. I need to understand what you do. I need you to help me understand what I need to do to be successful. Facebook was very chaotic in those days. And by grabbing people and zeroing them in on that, I earned a lot of credibility with my team and others, because I said, it was like, well, this guy's willing to admit that he doesn't know what's going on, or even though I think I did. And I would listen. I was just listening. I was asking lots of questions, listening. I had this thing called Teach Me How to Do Your Job in 45 minutes, where I send people a meeting invitation. I did that with over 100 people in the company, all over the business, including Mark. Mark gave me probably 2 hours, and people love to talk.
Well, fair enough, maybe.
People love to talk about what they do.
Yep.
And you'll find that most people have never been asked that question by anybody in a company, and they've never been asked it by somebody senior that much than them. Now, some folks I found were annoyed by that question. There were a few. They were like, "What's this? A waste of time. Who are you?" But I would say 98% were like, door swings open, and we would sit and talk deeply about, how does their part of the sausage get made? What makes them? What satisfies them? What frustrates them? what do they want to improve? What are the systems processes that they've got in their world? Who do they hand things off to? Who hands things off to them? And I kind of built this mental map of how Facebook worked from doing that, which was probably in those days better than anybody had.
Mm.
I had a really, because it was a chaotic business in those days.
So what was the benefit of the approach that you took? Like, what did it end up allowing you to do?
It allowed me to do a couple things. One was to build a network of people that I could draw on as
Mm.
time went forward. We were a very fast changing, innovative, disruptive business where things were in constant semi chaos. And so knowing who to grab in the chaos or who to call, like I wound up with and that network held me in good stead for years while I was there. But I just knew people, because I'd met them in those early days. Oh yeah, then, and I stayed in touch with them. We were all connected, but I'd spent that quality time with them, that deep time, and that's getting that deep time with people is really hard, right? So I had that network. That's one thing. The second thing was, I think, just credibility
Mm.
for me. Like it humanized me. It showed I was humble. People were joking about, old man Scheeler, OMS, I was called. Like it became, and then it became history. It didn't matter anymore.
You
I was
became
one of,
Stephen, right? After a
yeah,
bit of time, you became Stephen. Age
I was
became
one of the,
irrelevant.
exactly. Now I had to deliver, I had to have good results, which I
Mm.
did, but I needed the credit. I needed people to want to work with me and take me seriously in order to even become successful. And I think the third thing it did for me was it humanized it. It humbled me in a good way. Like it was I my career would my early days of my career was like the '90s and the early 2000s. I mean, I started my career way back in the '80s, and that was the old days when it was the smartest guy in the room would make all the decisions, and you would just casual Friday was you loosened your tie. I mean, it was much more hierarchical, and you just did your job. You never questioned the guy above you. But by the time I got to Facebook, all that had changed. Right, Facebook was absolutely upside down, where it was they were the ones going to upending the media business. They were disrupting the world, move fast and break things. It was the opposite of what I had been
Mm.
inculcated in
Mm.
my professional career,
Mm-hmm.
and so I had to like turn myself upside down as a result, without pretending I'm 22 again. And I found that by earning that kind of credibility and respect, people then listen to you. You do have when the years go by, you do learn things. You have experience. You don't panic the way younger, more experienced people do. And people would turn to me. Sometimes I tell these stories of the past, or World War II. My dad served in World War II. And I remember in the early days, other Facebookers would roll their eyes like, "Oh, another old man Scheeler story." But I found once I got my once I got my credibility, they would listen to my stories, or I'd come back to my stories jokingly, and I'd be like, "Remember when I told you that story?" And I'd say, "You can see now why I told you that story." They, "Oh yeah, it's sunk in." People would remember even my dumb stories. I'd say, "No, no, there was a point to that story." And so, but I needed the credibility to be able to get there, to be able
Mm.
to pull out those old favorites. So
Going back to this patterns of change sort of situation, there would have been some systems and processes and ways of or modes of being within the Facebook business that would have been quite difficult for you to accept. Is there any tangible examples of things that they would do quite differently that you felt stuck on?
yeah, there were a few that we did change actually. So I wasn't the only older person that got hired. There was a bit of a adults being brought in that wave. There's a couple of the different. Every company has its moments where it brings in new leaders or new blood, and I was part of a wave that came in that were designed to basically kind of professionalize the business, take
Mm.
it from a kind of hot tub club to more of a business, but still maintain the old essence of Facebook culture. And that was a painful transition for some people. So when I joined, it was clear to me and to a few other of us who came in at my wave that there were a lot of folks in Facebook at that time who were just not right for the next phase. They were talented or good, but they weren't going to be able to make the transition to the next phase of a more orderly, company, and some of that came out really quickly. I can remember, uh, I'll give you an example. There was in Sydney, there was a new office that we just put in, and I used to work across several offices, but the Sydney office it was on the top floor where the Facebook office was, and there were like 20 people that were in there in that office, and then down in the basement there was 2 car spaces that were allocated to that tenancy, to the Facebook office,
Mm.
and so the like office manager at the time, the person setting up that office, she just did the logical thing. She assigned one of those for visitors, so it's going to be a visitor spot, and the other she just gave to the most senior guy in the office, right? The head of the office, the managing director or general manager,
Mm-hmm.
whatever we call him in that day,
Mm-hmm.
the boss. The boss gets, that's logical, right? One's for visitors, one for the boss.
Mm-hmm.
There was a whole meeting called about that in that office. Like everybody got together and because they like, this is a big deal. We gotta nip this in the bud. This is
Wow.
not Facebook culture. This is not Facebook. No perk for the boss. That's not how we work. Everybody's equal here. So there was this. I remember the big meeting. I was in the office that day, and there's like this big meeting. What's it about? Oh, it's about the car space that's been allocated to the GM. And you're like, well, why are we all talking about that? Well, it's not Facebook.
Oh, wow.
So you're like,
Okay.
yeah, I get it, but is this really what we should be talking about? Is this, and as you go forward, you just say, well, those sorts of things, that's not going to scale, right? You're going to have to. This is not a commune.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we had to decommune a lot of those discussions and decisions, which some people couldn't adjust to, and they wound
Mm.
up leaving the
Mm.
business.
I'm wondering about your insights and the differences between millennials and boomers, because, the old tropes of, is it true around the old tropes of millennials being ungrateful, distractible, idealistic, lacking in resilience? I mean, what has your experience been? And what binds us, regardless of where we are generationally?
Well, I mean, millennials are getting along in the tooth now as well, right? Like,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
so you're
Please don't
almost
say that. Please don't say that.
you're a 14-year-old. You're virtually a boomer yourself, Joe. You can't distinguish. Once you get a little gray in your hair, that's it. You're a boomer. Look, we're all human. Every generation thinks that the generation that went before their parents' generation are old and dumb and slow, and it's, you just go back in history. The same thing happened repeatedly. So I think there's nothing new there at all. It's just the same repeat.
Mhm.
So I think, Joe, the big difference between millennials and boomers, at least in my view, is the boomers have economic benefits that millennials don't benefit
Mhm.
from.
Mhm.
And I think there's other cultural things, etc. And every generation thinks the previous generation were idiots. I mean, they're just to simplify. That happens all the time. But I think now the unique thing about this situation is just the really big economic and opportunity kind of difference between the two generations. I think it's pretty stark.
Mm.
And if you're born in 1955 or 1950, you had a pretty good run. You had pretty much a guaranteed job. You had good benefits. You had a house that you owned that secured your wealth. And now that's changed, right? Jobs are more insecure. You move around a lot more. It's a gig economy. Um, it's a much more expensive to get into things like the housing market, which is all set up to benefit folks that already own the houses, not the people who want to buy the houses. That's true in Australia and the U.S. Um, and and we don't have the same. We've got many more old people and fewer young people. So the burden in terms of the tax and the kind of economic burden on young people to keep old people going, just to generalize, is much higher now than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Mm. Mm.
And all of that, then you add other things to that mix, the difference in technology, the difference in, how we socialize. When I grew up, there was no internet, no
Mm.
social media. Now it's
Mm.
ubiquitous.
Mm.
I think it just drives a difference in how you've experienced the world and the benefits you've gotten from that world.
Mhm.
And I was always struck by when Brexit happened, for example. If you break down the Brexit vote, whether you agree with it or not, if you break it down, you look at people who were older. I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Mm,
They voted overwhelming in favor of
mm,
Brexit.
mm,
Those who were younger voted against it.
mm, mm,
And
mm.
you think about who's going to live with the consequences of Brexit. It's the younger ones, but
Yep.
it's the older ones who are voting to keep it.
Yes.
And so you saw a classic kind of dichotomy there on a common issue that is really profound, obviously profound for the UK and for Europe. And there was this clear age difference about how to approach it. And I think that's kind of common on so many big topics today. Young
Mm,
people more, I mean, again, I'm probably generalizing on the data, but I think young people would vote more heavily about yes to controlling climate change and paying a price to do that.
mm,
Older
mm.
people don't want to pay that price as much
Yeah.
generally. Um,
So I think they're clear distinctions of what are the gaps between the generations, and they're clearly there. But it seems like the way that you've solved for that in a business context is to exhibit a curiosity and a vulnerability, and to ask questions. And I think you would argue that on both ends or both sides of the
yeah,
generational gap, that is the
yeah,
answer to
yeah, and an
actually
empathy
solving.
and I think we have as a society in many ways lost a lot of that, and you're
Yeah.
seeing that in
Yep.
this,
Very
particularly in
divisive.
the U.S., where people are they're just getting set in their points of view, and they're
Yes.
losing that
Yes.
ability to ask questions, to empathize, to
Mm,
listen.
mm,
Yeah,
mm. And how have you prevented, as I think about it, like the aging of the soul? I mean, there's an element of not much we can do biologically as we age. I mean, there's some things. There's obviously biohacking is now prevalent out there in terms of longevity and the rest of it. But when it comes to actually just this being adaptive and being flexible and being resilient, and not letting ourselves age in the traditional sense,
yeah.
what tips do you have?
Wow. Yeah, I don't. I'm 58
Mhm.
now, and
Still a young man.
yeah, yeah. I'm hoping I've got another 50 good years ahead of me. That's sort of my plan. Um, it's funny. I went to the Australian passport office to get a new passport yesterday. My passport got water damaged, so I just walked in, and they gave me a form. They said, "Here, fill this out, bring it back." And the form said it gave a time limit to submit the form back to the government, which was December 2099.
Yeah.
Well, December 31st, 2099. So I joked, I posted it, and I joked, I said, I've got 76 years to get this back to the passport office. I better get moving. So somehow I don't think I'll be filing that in 2099. Hopefully, who knows? Um, yeah. Well, I've got something. I'm very lucky. I've got three young kids. So I've been married a couple times, and I met my current wife, my last wife, 10 years ago,
Mm,
and she's a bit younger than me. So I've had three kids in my 50s,
mhm,
and that's not a solution for everybody, but I think it's really helped me. Just I'm with my kids; they're so young. I'm so appreciative of their existence, and like
mm.
and feel a sense of responsibility, but in a good way. Like I
Yeah.
have not just a heavy way, but a good way. Like I love the sense of I can hand things forward to my kids. Now, what is that going to be? Sometimes I don't know. I want it to be, I want them to be good. I want them to be good people. I want them to make the world a better place. I want to help make the world a good place for them and
Mm,
their kids to grow up in.
mm,
And
mm,
I've become much more probably aware of that
mm,
now than before I had my kids. So, for those of you who are parents, being a parent has changed my perspective on the world
mm,
pretty dramatically, and
mm,
and I think having kids later in my life, in my 50s, also even made that
mm.
more intense.
Yep, go on.
Yeah, and then I think beyond the kids thing though is I'm just very optimistic. I think there's something about optimism and curiosity, right? I'm very curious. I always want to, and then
Mm.
that can be a danger too, because with the world of the internet now, you can be curious about anything, and you can just go deep on any topic you
Yeah,
want.
yeah,
But I'll be lying in bed at night, and somehow I'll be like, so what's the gaseous, structure of Mars or something. Literally, I'll be like, I'll wake up, I'll flip it open, I'll be like, okay, Mars. Let me read up on Mars, like, and I'll
yeah.
just sit there for 20 minutes while I should be sleeping.
I get it.
It
Yep.
be dangerous, but I've always been just really, my brain's very curious.
Mm,
And then at the second thing I think is I'm really optimistic sometimes to a fault,
mm,
because I feel like, again, I think it links back to when I was a kid, and I'm, I have a couple siblings who aren't here anymore.
mm,
It's like I have three siblings who aren't here anymore,
mm,
and I'm like, I'm here. And I think life, being alive, is the most lucky. It's the luckiest. I don't know what the word is, but it's the most fortunate thing that there is. I even Googled this once, again, like late at night. I wondered how many people have ever been born on the face of the earth. I was curious. And I looked it up, and it's estimated it's about 108 billion people have actually
wow.
been born ever since Lucy, stood up and walked around in
Mm,
Africa. 108 billion, and about 8 billion around Earth today. Half of those 8 billion don't even have access to the internet or, reliable
mm,
water and food. You and I live in the very, top 1.1%. But I would say to myself, and I say to others often, it's like, how many of those 108 billion would swap places with you right now? And the answer is probably 99.9999% of them would. And I'm on, things like depression, mental illness are massive problems. You can't just make yourself happy. But I try to always have that in my mind. I've already won the lottery, and every day is a blessing. And I'm super
mm,
optimistic about
mm,
and thankful,
mm,
and gratitude, very thankful for what
mm,
I have. So
mhm,
those sorts of things keep me grounded, and I think keep me young, as
mm,
at least inside my, I think you said, spirit or
mm,
soul, and
mm, mm.
I think that helps me.
Yeah, it makes sense. So you've mentioned a number of things: your kids and your optimism, and the speed of change. And I think about not there would be it would be very pressing for you to make sure that your children are adaptive and able to be flexible. Given what you know, can't think of anyone better than to speak about technology and the rise of AI. The speed of change is about to hit us even harder than it ever has before, and the dropping of like geographical and state based boundaries as well is something that's going to occur at an unprecedented level. So really, this ability to adapt with it is absolutely the most important thing I think that we can focus on at the moment. Would you agree? Have you got any thoughts around this?
Yeah, actually, I was just last night. I'm a uh, adjunct professor at UNSW, and I for the business school. And last night I had a bunch of those MBA students, and we were talking exactly about this topic, which is, adaptability. How fast things are changing? How do we keep up? I've got a couple of there are many thoughts on this, but I'll give you a couple ones. One is, I think things aren't moving in one way. I don't think things are changing any faster than previous eras of technology change.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at like the electrification of the world,
Mm-hmm.
that happened really fast.
Mm-hmm.
It happened incredibly quickly, and just think about how profound that was. Like where
Yeah.
night becomes day. You can see there's light, and it's cheap. Factories changed overnight from water based and beast based to electricity based. You think about the shift when the motor car was invented, the automobile. That, if you again read up on that, that changed so much about so many profound changes, not just around, oh, there's more cars and more roads. It's about how food could be transported or goods could be transported. It's about how cities even were designed and built. It's about how people experience their local neighborhoods and their human interactions. Before automobiles, your world was that big,
Mm.
right? After automobiles, your world became much bigger. And so it changed even if you go back to the old days, people lived right next door to their sisters, parents, grandparents. Everybody lived in the same neighborhood. As soon as the car came along, that started to change. And in countries
Wow.
like Australia and America, that changed profoundly. People would move to the other side of the country. And, in the old days, moving to the other side of the country was a life and death experience,
Mm. Mm.
just in the mid 1800s. But by 1920, 1910, you just get in the car and drive. So, like, that was such a
Yeah.
transformation. So
Makes
we've been
sense.
through these things before, is my
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And And there were people that thought it was the end of the world and everyone's going to lose their jobs, and you know we adapted and we found new ways of creating value and doing things. So that's one observation. The other observation, though, is I think in some ways things are different. It is faster. Why? Because we're building technologies on technologies now in a way that, um, particularly with software and the internet, can happen so quickly, right? Even with the automobile, it happened really fast. But you had roads had to be built, petrol stations had to be built, refineries had to be built. That took time. Like laying down concrete and putting up, laying down roads takes time. The internet, it's there, right? So look at a couple of recent examples, like when Facebook launched Threads on Instagram. What was that, 6 months ago or something? Like they got to 100 million users in
Mm,
days, right?
mm, mm,
Now they weren't necessarily the sticky users. It's fallen back a bit, but I was even 10 years ago. That was science fiction, fantasy to have something scale that quickly. You look at ChatGPT, which OpenAI released. That went to 100 million users within, again, days,
mm,
and that was impossible. It would be impossible without the internet. But what it starts to show is just how fast technologies can propagate on top of existing
mm,
platforms and
mm.
systems, and the internet is the core backbone of what can drive that. And the fact that we all have these computers in our hands now, whereas even 15 years ago we didn't. We were sitting in front of laptops all the time. As soon as you left your machine, you walked out the door, you weren't connected to the internet. We're all connected, or half the world's connected to the internet all the time now. And so that's where AI becomes so profound, because what AI can do is just make that whole thing work better and differently.
So tell me,
And
so tell me about omniscient. And you're an optimistic guy, and an ambitious guy. Tell me about omniscient. Tell me about how AI is actually going to be solving for some problems that
yeah,
society has created, potentially partly as a result of technology, but technology is what's going to help us get out of this mess, which is the ironic twist in it.
it is. Yeah, exactly. Technology creates the problems, then we find more technology to solve the problems we created.
Yeah.
Um, so Omniscient, what we do is we use AI to decode the brain, and we focus on medical imaging to do this. So we take a standard MRI, and then we look at there's a lot of data in that MRI beyond just the image. And your brain is a data processor. So we now build probably the world's most advanced maps of the brain. To even go deeper, that we build an atlas of the brain, so it shows where the major networks are located in your brain,
Mm.
and it's individualized to an individual's brain, because every brains are slightly different. And then we build something even more powerful, which is a matrix. The matrix, it's an anomaly matrix. It compares how your brain networks are functioning compared to a healthy brain. It's an ability to be able to identify what are the faults in your circuitry that may be perfectly natural. We all have little anomalies in our brains, but some, when they become bad enough, it becomes like it's things like mental illness, neurodegeneration, or it's things like superintelligence, or the ability to really do something well. So what we can map now are things like emotions, intelligence, mental illness, neurodegeneration, and these things were never possible. You couldn't see those things in the brain before. So it's kind of like we built it's like the X-ray was invented in the 1890s. And you can see inside the body. Well, we've now built the same sort of thing to be able to see inside the brain. And now our job is to start to commercialize that platform and to build tools that doctors and researchers and mental health professionals and eventually even brain innovators, like these brain machine interface companies. We can build tools for all of those guys. So we're kind of this mapping layer of the human brain.
It
So
seems
that's what we do.
seems like we, in some ways, have gone against our human nature in some ways, and ancient traditions kind of express certain things that we should do to keep our certain wellness and mental well-being in check. And it seems to be kind of a movement towards kind of looking at those things to assist us. Do you think that this technology might identify someone pre-depression, as an example, and hopefully I identify forms or strategies with a healthcare professional to move them into the modes that actually, or the strategies that actually assist them get back on track, rather than my main concern with this sort of thing is the technology picks up the pre-depressive issue, and then we move into a very chemical based sort of solution that is about immediacy rather than actually having more of a
Yeah.
sustainable approach to
Yeah.
improvement, that sort of
Like,
thing.
it's like, rather than here, take a pill to fix the problem, just never have the problem develop in the first
Well,
place,
yeah,
right?
create the strategies to actually not get into that situation to begin with. Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm hoping it's going, not hoping, we're planning and building our tools to be, prevention is a huge part of what we want to do.
Yep.
Now, we don't build the therapies, the cures, the drugs. That's not what we do. We build the maps, we build the targets, we build the brain insights that allow those doctors or pharma companies or psychiatrists, mental health professionals to be better at what they do, so they can diagnose more accurately, so they can predict, or look for biomarkers where they can start to predict, hey, you're likely to get this. Let's get on top of it ahead of time. So they can take existing drugs and therapies and target them more precisely, because they understand exactly what's going on in your brain, rather than, hey, I'm not sure, you might have this, you might have that, but here, take this pill, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. That's the state of mental health. If you just look at mental health, that's the state of how mental health works today. It's totally generalized. It's like, we think you've got this problem, but we're not sure because it's so complex. Here's a pill that might work, but sometimes it makes your symptoms actually worse. And it's going to make you feel, it's going to make you gain weight. This is going to happen. That's going to happen. But hey, maybe it'll solve part of that problem we think you might have. So this is why mental health is such a shit show, for want of a better word. And it's not because people don't care. It's because they don't have the tools to see what they're solving for.
Yeah.
And so that's what we provide.
So you're giving a precision around the diagnosis rather than it being opaque and
Yeah, it's like
questionable
saying,
results.
if you break a bone,
Yep.
what does the doctor do? Does the doctor talk to your arm about how it feels, or talk to you about it? Yeah, maybe ask them, but they send you for an X-ray. But if you break your brain, what does the doctor do? They pretty much just talk to you if it's a mental health issue. They don't actually look inside your brain. So
No.
we see ourselves as being the kind of the X-ray for the brain, where we become the standard of, the first thing your doctor will do if you have anything related to your brain, pain, neurodegeneration, mental health issues, or it's just preventative. Hey, every 6 months, let's look at it's called your connectome. You've got a genome. Your connectome is the connection to your brain. Let's look at your connectome every 6 months, and your families, and be on top of anything that's creeping in there. We shall we service our cars with more diagnostic accuracy and technology.
We sure do. We
service our brains today.
Yeah, I
right?
completely agree. Yeah.
If you go to see a mechanic and he doesn't attach something to read the computer on the car, you're like, hey man, what are you doing? You can't just look at that.
Yeah.
But we go to see the doctor, and there's no technology that looks at your brain. Where it's just so far from what we can do, given the current tools that the companies like ourselves are developing.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I've got to be careful with the way I frame this question, because mental health is not something to muck around with, but some of the greatest minds have actually created as a result of some of the mental health issues that they've had. As an example, Picasso, would see certain things that others wouldn't, and that was suggested as partially as a result of his dyslexia and potentially some of the bipolar symptoms as well. And then you've got Chris Farley, who developed this incredible humor as a result of experiential situations, bullying and lack of self-esteem, and we all end up we know what happened with Chris Farley, which is absolute tragedy. So obviously this sort of technology would solve for some of these issues, but I wonder whether some of the the things that we've seen that's given us color as a society as an adaptive outcome as a result of some of these temporary ailments. I don't know how you'd answer that, Stephen. It's just a curiosity.
Yeah, look, I asked myself the same question, and look, today we're a small company. The impact we're having in the world is small. We're hoping that over time it will scale to be billions of people, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, we occasionally muse on, if we're really successful, does this mean that there'll be no more great art? There'll be no more great novels. There'll be, there'll be no more Picassos, because if nobody is mental illness so connected to creativity, great creativity, in some ways, that we'll never have another Robin Williams, we'll never have another Chris Farley, we'll never have another Picasso. Look, I don't know.
Mm.
There is research that connects those two things in different ways.
Yeah.
Great creativity or great genius with also great challenges. But I'm hoping two things are going to happen. One is we're going to put more control in the hands of the people who own the brains. I call people who have we came up with a new term which we call brain owner,
Hmm.
because I don't like the word patient. Often in medical land you say it's the patient. I said no, no. Even if your brain's perfectly healthy, you're not a patient. But you got a brain, you still want to keep healthy or
Mm.
keep performing. So I said it's the brain owner. It's the person who owns the brain.
Mm.
And so I want our tools to be in the hands of brain owners, so that they can make these choices. Do I want to turn this up or turn that down? And so they have sovereign control, and I think that's really important. And the second thing I'm hoping will happen is that, yeah, we at the risk of shutting down a little bit of creativity, we don't have hundreds of thousands of suicides a year. Like I I don't want you know I'm just as you're talking to me here, I'm thinking about all the great creative people who have killed themselves. It's actually
Yeah.
running in my
Yeah.
head.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a price I'm willing to pay.
Yeah.
Like, I think because they'll have a longer life, and surely we can be able to walk the line between great creativity and not taking your own life, or the type of or the misery. Not committing
Yeah.
suicide is extreme, but there's people that live in absolute misery
And pain. Yeah.
because of
Yeah.
the challenges they have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, they might be very creative in many ways, but I think they would welcome the ability to get away from the dark side, if they could.
Yeah. At least having the choice, right? At least having the choice and understanding what's the opportunity cost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you an example. In an early trial we ran in Shanghai in China. It was with the Shanghai Mental Health Institute. It was using our technology to map people's brains, and then these were people who had depression, and then they were treated with something called transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's a non-invasive
Yep.
neurostimulation technique. Um, and so there was a guy who took part in that, whose name was uh, Neil Badenhorst,
Hmm.
and he's a stand-up comedian. He's from South Africa. He's living in Shanghai, and he made a video about his experience. But he captured it really well. He said, "Look, because he'd been bipolar, manic depressive, suicidal his whole life. He'd been on all kinds of medications. He'd seen therapists. Nothing was working. Um, although Prozac kind of worked, but it turned him down. He said I was a flat downer all the time on Prozac, and I was
Hmm.
sick of being on it. So he got off it, but that made him more manic and up and down. But anyway, he got mapped by us, and then he got his treatment, and the treatment was very successful. But not just that the treatment was successful, which regulated his networks. It turned up and tuned down the parts of his brain that were making him
Hmm.
making him depressed, suicidal, hearing voices, all this stuff. But what he said was, I could see what was going on in my head, and I could start to really understand, get my head around what the problems were that we need to solve here. And then when I came out the other end, my creativity got better. I was now I was better in my creativity because I didn't go to these extremes where I would kind of want to, virtually want to kill myself to get to the next thing. And he said it transformed his life. He said
It's
that he
amazing.
was, and the highs, he's now higher. Like, he's like, things that used to make me happy now make me euphoric. And that's just one person's experience,
Yeah.
but
It's amazing.
I think it's a very creative guy, and he's a comedian. And
Yeah.
he said this made me it made me better at what I do.
Mm. I'm mindful of time. I feel like we could have a 4 or 5 part series, Stephen, and I've got a million questions, but I'm mindful of your time, and I just want to round up with sort of talking about money. Obviously, you're looking to find capital for your current business, Omniscient, but and it's so we talk about it's never about money, but at the same time, money is required to be able to expand and do the things that you want to do, and you've got some pretty ambitious and audacious goals, right?
Mm. Yeah. No, look, we live in the real world. Any great research or great companies have to be funded. And so our company, we've been very blessed. We've raised money here in Australia,
Mm,
about 70, 80 million over the past couple of years, all from, we're lucky, all from high net worth individuals who
mm,
kind of are in our circle. And some of Australia's most prominent and successful people have invested in our business, supported us. And it's because not just because they want to see a return, but they believe in the mission that we have, which is to try to eradicate things like mental illness from the
mm,
face of the earth. They
mm,
believe in our team.
mm,
So we're very lucky to have that. But
mm,
we're always looking to grow that. And look,
mm,
I could, I could, if you handed me $1 billion, I could use that $1 billion tomorrow.
mm.
And so, yeah, we're constantly, anybody in a startup, this isn't just unique to us. You're always out there trying to, look for the next investor, the next partner, the next person to help you scale on your journey. Particularly if you're trying to build, a company that has big global, global change the world ambitions like we do.
Mm. When you think about if you were to advise and look back at your 20-year-old self now, knowing what you know now, what do you think? What would you advise 20-year-old Stephen about how to approach life?
I wouldn't change a thing.
Ha, that's a good
um,
answer.
I would tell 20-year-old Stephen, because 20, I was in a good zone by 20. Like I gotten out of my teenage angst. I was, I was, I was in I was hitting my, great zone. I've had a great zone ever since. My teenage years were a little up and down because of what I talked about before, but by then I was feeling great. And I would basically say to myself, just do what you feel like you want to do. Because I've always just pursued things I'm excited about and make me passionate.
Mm,
And then I just figure out later, whether this is a good idea or not. And I just find that that's the best way to live life. Don't be constrained by what other people think. Do what you are passionate about and excites you. We're only on this earth for a short time.
yeah.
Think about, one, make yourself happy. That's very
Mm,
important. But two, the thing I didn't know at 20 so much was how I didn't feel the sense of responsibility for others that I feel now.
okay.
And so that's what's changed. It was all about making myself happy and fulfilling myself at
But
20.
you can't force that on a 20-year-old. It's
No,
not something
now
that
I'm
comes with.
more
Mm,
aware of the people around me, my family, my friends, my community, my society, the people
yep.
I work with.
Yep.
Like I feel more sense of responsibility for them than I did at 20.
Mm, mm. And do you think your perception of money and what it brings has changed over a period of time?
Yeah, yes and no. My parents were pretty humble and hardworking. We were not wealthy,
Hmm.
but we weren't poor. We were lower middle class, middle
Hmm.
class.
Hmm.
Um, but one thing about me, which I think is a good feature of me, is I'm very unmaterialistic
Mm,
in terms of like, I, maybe I don't know if I'm generous or not, but I really don't care how much. I mean, if you look at me, I don't wear a watch. I don't have any jewelry.
yeah.
My wife has to buy me my clothes because I wear them till they're ragged. I don't own a car.
Yeah.
Like I have no interest. Yeah, I've got
Yeah.
friends. They've got their Ferraris and their boats and their yachts. Like I have no interest in toys and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Got a nice house, yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm like, I don't need anything. Like my
Mm,
it drives my wife crazy. She's like, what am I going to get you for your birthday or Christmas? I said, I just want to be with my family. I don't want anything.
mm.
And I think I often ask the question, how rich is rich enough as a society, right?
Yeah.
Like, or as
Yeah.
individuals, right?
Yeah.
And I always say, I'm rich enough.
Mm,
Now, my job now is not to make more money to buy more things, or my family will be fine. They're looked after. But now my job is like change the world, leave a legacy behind. Because here's one of the, maybe this is a good place to wrap. Here's one of the
mm,
things I've started asking people the past couple of years when
mm,
it's like an icebreaker when I meet them,
mm.
like you're trying to make small talk. And I say, let me ask you a question. What do you want engraved on your tombstone?
Wow.
And I find a lot of people pause and they'll turn to me and they say, well, I'm thinking about that. What do you want? And I said, two words, good dad. That's what I want on my
Oh,
tombstone. And then maybe a couple more, or three more, change the world, right? And then three more for the better. Like good dad, change the world for the better. That's it.
amazing.
And that I didn't think that 10 years ago. Now I do. And so that's my new kind of North Star. I'm thinking about what am I going to put on my grave. There's a cemetery right up the street from my house, and I always say to my wife, when I die, you just take me up and throw me over the brick wall, and then you just chisel that. Hopefully, you can chisel that on my tombstone. And I really think that's a great icebreaker for anybody, because I think it really makes people suddenly think, okay, yeah, why am I here? Why do I exist? Why do I have this job or this? Or
And
this
I think it's so adaptive. It's such an adaptive process to and such a beneficial process to actually contemplate our death and think about our mortality, because it does make us grateful and informs the way that we take the steps on a day-to-day basis, which is clear. I mean, those very, very simple words that you've suggested, I can see the link between them in the very complex world that you live in, to try to really make change in, with the current business that you're working with. So I think it's quite amazing. I feel like I want to wrap it up there, but I have to ask you the last question, which I ask every guest, which is, what is your spirit animal, Stephen?
I am, well, that's funny you should ask that. I am a Capricorn, and I think I have a lot of characteristics of a goat.
A goat. A goat. There you go.
Weirdly enough, like a mountain goat. I've also
the first goat that we've had.
My family often says I'm like a mountain goat. Like, I mean, if you've been I'm sure you've been to mountains. I remember being in like South America. I don't know, I can't remember the name of this type of goat, but you're looking up this mountain.
Yes, and they just
and it's like vertical, and you see these goats skipping along, and you're like, how do those things not fall?
Yeah.
And I've always felt like, I'm comfortable carrying a big weights on my shoulder, literally, like physically. I've got a hard head. I've got a big, bold, hard head. I'm very goat-like. I think that's probably my spirit animal.
That's amazing. It's amazing. What a great example. And I think this has been an absolute cracker episode, because we've really touched on health outcomes, community, personal development, and really that sort of, as I started with that pattern of change. So thanks very much for your contribution. I'm sure our listenership will absolutely love this one.
My pleasure, Joe. Thanks for the invitation, and great to be here. It's been a fantastic conversation.
Thanks so much.
If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.